logical investigation too, which of course the technology I'm going to explain later. But they started investigating me. So, and I knew it was happening. I had cars following me around, all this just an intense amount of resources following me around everywhere. Which I noticed the interesting thing was it was not really any different than the stuff I had experienced since Obama was elected. So it's well before any of this was happening. So there was not much of a change in my environment. It was pretty much constant. But then I started realizing that hey, these people are all in on it together and doing all sorts of criminal things. They have no qualms, be it drugs or prostitution or whatever. They're involved in all of it. So in the mafia and all this stuff there, it's all tied together. So I kind of waited, and the next thing I know, I had a very minor arrest incident in New Jersey, and the military was playing all these games, using it, kind of to say we're going to keep playing this homosexual recruitment. They keep playing that, and at the same time they would use that incident and say you have to write all these letters, you have to do all this work, and they keep playing the game with the homosexual recruitment. Like if you give in to this, then we can make this all vanish. You don't have to do all this work. But I just kept doing the work, kept seeing, okay, this is just a minor thing, but you're going to make me do all this stuff because it was a nonsense incident. It was a phony setup, false arrest sort of incident that was just a game, and it's been expunged from my record at this point. So at least I believe it should be completely off the record. It's not even something that was significant at all. It was a minor, like a equivalent of a traffic ticket ultimately. But the military does all these different checks on these kind of things. So my security clearance then was denied 2 days. I'd already moved all my stuff into storage, was kind of worried about what the consequences could be of actually being in the military while trying to fight this nonsense establishment of kind of criminal activity that's going on throughout the country. But they denied it, and so I said, okay, forget the military. They went through all this trouble, and then 2 days before, after you set your life up, I was very pleased actually. This was good. I didn't realize quite why at the time, but this was actually the big victory right here for me. So I, actually stayed at college, Sonoma State University, with a friend there, a girlfriend that I had at the time, and I, kept living my life, and things were all kinds of psychological nonsense going on around me. A lot of stuff happening to me while I was sleeping. I mean, extreme abuse, but I was able to, keep fighting it in my own way. I had my own techniques and all kinds of tactics, which I'd been studying all along to psychologically fight what they were doing. And so I endured it. And then in about the end of April, I found, I was researching, I was very unhappy in the United States. I knew I had a problem there. I didn't know quite the extent of the problem. I had read that gang stalking was an international sort of problem that goes on everywhere. I now know this is true. It's an international network at this point. It hasn't always been this way, but now every country has pretty much fallen under the United States' control through the CIA and other psychological maneuvering. So they've got people everywhere. So and this has been experienced by other targets. At this point, I would call myself what you call a targeted individual, somebody who has been put on the list for whatever the reason, and is being targeted by all the different stalking organizations and groups who participate in this kind of nefarious activity. So I read the Quran on the internet. I was researching other countries. See, a lot of countries are based on Islam, so it guided me to let's read the Quran. Let's see what's going on here. And it was very difficult. I was definitely under a lot of psychological and electronic warfare and different types of harassment. And whenever I would try to read the Quran, all of a sudden, there'd be noise around me or distractions, or I would feel tired or have a headache, whatever it was. But I endured enough to read about the first 10 chapters or surahs of the Quran. And at that point, I decided to convert to Islam because I realized the message contained in the Quran was a message that no man could write. And I went to an elite all-boys private school for high school and grade school, and I'd gone to a very good university. Lehigh University is ranked, in the top 50, I think 35th, or in that range. And I never met anybody who was so smart or wise as could write messages in Al Quran. And I realized that this is a message that no man could write. The United States has the best education system, supposedly, which is probably not true, but still has a very solid education system, at least in certain places, compared to the rest of the world. And I'd met a lot of intelligent people, but a lot of people I was also unimpressed with too, in terms of their academic achievements and intelligence and motivation to learn. But this was different. Something here was special, and it also the chapter Al-Baqarah, the second chapter, it talks a lot about the hypocrites and their actions. And I realized this was a book that was dedicated in part to differentiating the truth and what is false. This was a message from Allah, our God, telling us the way to live, a way to do things, and a way to see the light, which is the truth, as opposed to being stuck in darkness and blind and believing lies or the falsehoods that are spread and are prevalent throughout society. So I was full-heartedly converting and wanting to read the Quran. I wanted to read more. I wanted to learn more. But in the United States, I realized I was in trouble. I was not going to be able to do that. I was going to be fighting a very difficult battle to learn. So I eventually, was starting to stay. I moved out to stay at some hotels. I terminated this relationship with the girlfriend, and then after going from a few hotels to a few hotels down to I was in Los Angeles for a little bit. I went straight. I made a determination that I'm going to leave the USA. I went straight up to Canada from California. I drove for literally an entire day straight without sleep, and it was a very difficult drive. I was very, very tired, drinking a lot of coffee, and when I made it to the Canada border, was I relieved. And on the way, I bought a copy of the Quran, an actual paper copy, because I'd before been reading it on my computer on the internet. This copy was by Maulana Muhammad Ali, who is wrote a famous translation. He dedicated his life to translating the Quran. It's from Lahore, Pakistan, and this copy is special because the translation helped spread Islam in the West, and he spent his whole life, as I said, working on it. He finished the final touches of this Quran when he was on his deathbed, 1 week before he died. And so this man, may Allah be pleased with him, spent his life in the work of spreading Islam, and he did an excellent job. The translation really was one that I could feel from my heart. It sits well. It holds its own. It's got footnotes all over. It introduces the chapters. It explains the continuity and the way the different chapters flow, and the way that the chapters flow not only within them but together with each other. And the footnotes explain all the history. And the translation is largely flawless in terms of finding the best words to describe the Arabic words. So I started really reading the Quran when I was in Canada. I started actually opening it up, and I actually felt quite refreshed in Canada. My escape to Canada was quite dramatic and wow, quite good. And here's the fascinating part. At the border of Canada, I was informed when I'm listening to them checking me, because they made me go in at the border to talk to them about what I was going to be doing in Canada. And they mentioned that I had a security clearance, which this is very crucial here. I had not known before that I had a security clearance. I was never informed of it, because the last I had heard, it was denied when 2 days before they wanted to ship me into the army. But my recruiter for the army had called with, quote, good news. He just left a voice message saying good news to call him back, but I never called him back because I was, sick and tired with all the nonsense that the U.S. Army had given me at this point. So I just never called him back, and that was that. And at Canada, I found out the good news probably implied I had a security clearance, but nothing official was ever informed to me. So you can imagine this was interesting to me. I had just escaped the United States, and now I find out that they had given me a security clearance, which I didn't even want, at the time. But okay, so at least this is useful information. The whole point is to collect information against the United States government and to spread the truth. So at that point, I went to Canada and I started looking at asylum options, political asylum. Political asylum is where you're being persecuted and assaulted for any sort of protected reason, which can be your race, your political beliefs, your religion, your all these kind of crucial sort of things. I can't remember the exact list, but there's a specific list. So I talked to Canada about this, and Canada had mentioned that there were actually quite a few people who had already come describing the exact same type of problem I had had, and that none were ever successful. They said that the mental health people will all come and just try to classify any sort of case where you're describing the patterns of the way the mafia kind of harasses you. They always will call it paranoid schizophrenia. In fact, that's the way the techniques are designed, is so that they can cover it up always using which is largely a induced condition, induced by people who are abusing people, especially when they're babies. When babies are abused, they can cause multiple personalities, and most of those people are actually used for different tasks, but they can use it also as a weapon against anybody who comes out against the system. So this is a problem. And Canada said if you can find medical proof or that they doing some sort of abuse, any devices in your body, any of these things, then we can probably go to court and get this done. But they said other than that, it's nobody's really found political asylum in Canada. Canada will not give immigration anymore to U.S. citizens. So this is largely the last people U.S. citizens who have escaped to Canada were in the Vietnam War, and then after the Vietnam War, the route was closed down. The CIA also likely, I believe, sent many agents who pretended to be seeking political asylum there, but would get the asylum with all the people who were legitimately defecting because of the draft that was used in the Vietnam War. Many people did not want, were conscientious objectors, whatever their reasons were denied, and they had to go into the army and fight against their will. So they would run to Canada, and Canada would protect them. But the CIA sent, agents who also said we're running from the Vietnam War, but they were phony. So they set up a whole CIA network there to make sure that no more Americans could escape. America does not let people escape. America is a psychological slavery country, and it considers people assets, like property. So escaping America is extremely difficult. If you try to find cases where Americans have been granted political asylum by any country in the world, in fact, they are not granted political asylum. Americans are, they say the kind of the situation where you're on your own. You're at a loss to find any country who will help you. If you're from any other country, you can probably find another country that will help you. The only country that it seems will actually help Americans is Cuba. And there, I think, only have about seven people who are actually all fugitives from the United States, which is a little bit of a different situation. Although it maybe still have a similar situation because the USA can easily phony up evidence of, some sort of crime or other things to try to label people as fugitives who are trying to escape. So the USA is complete psychological slavery country. It's a continuation of Nazi Germany. So, and I will explain in the history how exactly this all fits together and makes perfect sense, so that one can understand. But so I realized Canada was kind of a lost cause, unfortunately. So I'm still learning at this point. I know a lot. I've pretty much figured out most of how all the systems work. But now at this point, I didn't know everything. So I realized Canada maybe closed off the route. There's nothing I can do there. They didn't seem like they would help me too much. So I decided to leave Canada and go to Turkey. So I figured Turkey is an Islamic country. I could strengthen my understanding of Islam. I learn by experiencing an Islamic culture, and keep going from there. So I ended up going to Turkey for 3 months. And in Turkey, and I should also mention in Canada, after about a week in Canada of clearing out and refreshing, the persecution and assaults started happening again. And so I was also happy to get out of Canada at that point. Thought, okay, Turkey, now can the USA really chase me there and be doing the same stuff? And the answer is yes. in Turkey, it didn't take long for me to realize that the same exact stuff was going to be going on there.